The story we're going to talk about today reads more like a work of fiction. A child goes missing and, against all odds, is found a few years later across the world. But what would happen next, no one could even believe. Let's talk about Nicholas Barclay. Nicholas Patrick Barclay was born on December 31st, 1980. He was being raised by his single mother and had two siblings, Carrie and Jason, who were quite a bit older than Nicholas. The family resided in San Antonio, Texas, and lived a fairly quiet existence. Nicholas Barclay was a troubled child. At an early age, he already had a juvenile criminal record with charges of breaking and entering, stealing, and truancy. His mother said he was hard to discipline, violent towards her at times, and was street smart. He thought he was 13 going on 30, and at such a young age already had 3 tattoos. The letter T on his left hand between his thumb and forefinger, the letter J on his left shoulder, and the letters L and N on the outside of his left ankle. He had even run away before when angry with his mother, but had always returned after a day. As a result of Nicholas's trouble with the law, he had a court date scheduled on June 14th, where there was the possibility that he would get sent to a group home. However, Nicholas would miss his court date. June 13th, 1994 seemed to be just an ordinary day. Nicholas's mother had talked to him that morning. She had given him $5 to play basketball and told him to be home by dinner. She then went to sleep as she worked overnights at a convenience store and slept during the day. Nicholas's older brother Jason, who lived with them, said that Nicholas phoned later in the day asking for a ride home. Since the basketball courts were only 1 to 2 miles away and not wanting to wake his mother, Jason told Nicholas to walk home. That is the last time the family would hear from Nicholas. When Nicholas never returned that day, the family was understandably very worried. According to his mother, his disappearance didn't make the news. No one seemed to care but his family. Perhaps part of the indifference came from Nicholas's several run-ins with law enforcement and times he had run away in the past. But days and weeks would go by and there was no sighting of Nicholas, no clues or leads at all. It was reported by his brother Jason in September of the same year, just a few months after his disappearance, that Nicholas was trying to break into their garage. However, when police arrived, they couldn't find Nicholas or any signs of a break-in, so that couldn't be considered a valid sighting. The police just assumed Nicholas would show up eventually. He was small for his age, at just 4 feet 8 and 80 pounds. He was last seen wearing a white shirt, purple pants, and carrying a pink backpack. His mother did fear that Nicholas would have gotten into a car with the stranger for a ride, given how street smart he thought he was. The family was at a loss as the years went by and no clues or sightings. They had resigned themselves that their beloved Nicholas had met with foul play. Then 3 years after his disappearance, they got a phone call that they could barely believe. Nicholas Barclay had been found alive. Nicholas's sister Carrie had gotten a phone call from someone with an accent. They said a frightened child was discovered in Linares, Spain on October 7th, 1997. The child didn't speak much, but eventually revealed he was from the U.S. and had been abducted by military police and brought to Spain into a sex slave ring where he had recently escaped. He also revealed his name. He said it was Nicholas Barclay. As you can imagine, Nicholas's family was absolutely overjoyed and in shock. His sister Carrie agreed to fly to Spain and retrieve her brother. When she got there, the reunion was sort of tense. Carrie was overjoyed, but Nicholas seemed nervous and wouldn't speak much. He wore a lot of clothes and a hat and stayed covered up. Carrie was certain the different way her brother acted was attributed to the horrible trauma he had been through the last 3 years. She brought many pictures and talked to Nicholas about the family and reminisced with him about past times. She was very excited to bring Nicholas back to her family and thought with his family's support and love, Nicholas would begin to recover from what he had been through. When Carrie and Nicholas arrived back in the U.S., his family was so happy to see him. Nicholas stayed very guarded, however, and his family was understanding, and in their mind, Nicholas had changed so much because of the horrible things that had been done to him. According to Nicholas, he had been beaten, raped, punished if he spoke English, and was forced to speak French. He even said that they did experiments on him and put solution in his eyes, which is why Nicholas's striking blue eyes were now brown. His family was horrified to find out everything their loved one had been through. Anything that didn't seem like their old Nicholas was attributed to the trauma he had been through in his family's mind. Nicholas started to settle into life back in San Antonio. He started high school, made some friends, and even had a crush on a girl. The TV show Hard Copy had heard about his unbelievable case and wanted to do an interview, so they hired PI Charlie Parker to find him. When Charlie Parker actually viewed Nicholas Barclay, he was stunned by how much he didn't look like the younger pictures of Nicholas he had seen. The now 16-year-old Nicholas had dark beard stubble, brown eyes, and what struck him the most was how different the ears looked. Charlie Parker thought the newfound Nicholas Barclay was perhaps a spy. Around the same time, Nicholas's family had sent him to a psychiatrist. They thought he could benefit from therapy to help him deal with everything he'd been through. Not long into therapy, the psychiatrist was alarmed. He noticed that Nicholas Barclay could not speak without a French accent. He said it was impossible for a child who was raised in the U.S. by English-speaking parents to not be able to speak without a foreign accent. He expressed his concerns to the FBI. In his opinion, this was most certainly not Nicholas Barclay. When the FBI was alerted, they had concerns as well. They informed Nicholas's family that there were fears he wasn't who he said. The family ignored the warning, though. The sister was convinced it was her brother, and the mother even refused a DNA test that would have confirmed it was her son. She didn't need to be convinced, she said. Meanwhile, the PI Charlie Parker was still on the case. His nagging suspicions about the newfound Nicholas Barclay were growing, and he was determined to find out the truth. He started to follow Nicholas and was even able to get his fingerprints. He then arranged a meeting with Nicholas where, to his surprise, he confessed. Finally, he admitted he was not Nicholas Barclay, but an imposter. The man posing as Nicholas Barclay was in reality Frederic Bardon. He was a 24-year-old French man wanted by Interpol and had a past history of false identities, fraud, and posing as teenagers. Nicholas Barclay had just been another in a long line of identities he had stolen. It took a while for the family to really believe it, but when it did sink in, the family was enraged and also felt stupid for having fell for it. Frederic Bardon was eventually arrested for his crime. He was convicted of perjury and illegally obtaining a passport and sentenced to 6 years in prison. While in jail, however, he made hundreds of collect calls from the phone in his cell, claiming he had info on missing persons cases, trying to con others. After his sentence, he was deported to France. 3 months after being deported, Bardon then attempted to steal the identity of missing 14-year-old Leo Bailey. But that's not where the story of Nicholas Barclay ends. Normally, I wouldn't want to give a horrible man like Frederic Bardon a forum to tell his lies. He is clearly a sociopath who shows absolutely no remorse for the pain he brought to Nicholas's family. But the way he came about this con and some accusations he levels are very interesting and certainly add another layer to this case. In his own words, Bardon had been detained in Linares, Spain, and he was wanted by Interpol for a reason that isn't specified. He knew that if he gave his true identity, he would go to jail. He came up with the plan to pose as someone from the U.S. He told law enforcement in Spain that he was a runaway from the U.S. but he wanted to be the one to contact his family. He said it was overnight in the U.S. currently, so the next day he would tell them his real name. He spent that night calling various police departments, posing as a police sergeant in the U.S., saying he was trying to match up a child that probably would have been missing a few years. It was too many for the PDs to go through, so they suggested he contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. He was talking with someone there, and they mentioned the name Nicholas Barclay. Bardon decided to steal his identity. According to him, he had the missing person flyer for Nicholas sent to him. He then dyed his hair blonde and had a girl in custody to give him the same tattoos that Nicholas had. He had explained away the wrong eye color and his accent on a pedophile ring who he claimed tortured and abused him. He kept questioning himself whether he could even pass this off. He thought since the missing boy had been missing 3 years, the family wouldn't know how Nicholas would have aged, so he had a chance. When he heard the sister was almost there to meet him, he actually ran away, fearing he couldn't pass this off and would go to jail. However, the police quickly found him and just figured he was nervous at being reunited. Bardon claimed he had always felt like an outcast in his real life, so he viewed posing as Nicholas a chance at a new life and to have people who loved him. Frederick Bardon doesn't really speak well of Nicholas's family. He does bring up some points in this case that many others have as well. How were they so willing to accept Nicholas as their family member? He claimed that when the sister Carrie came to Spain, she fed him all the information on who everyone was. That's how he got the questions correct when the judge in Spain asked him about who the family members were before they allowed him to leave the country. There were so many differences that people outside the family seemed to pick up on right away. Frederick only lived in the U.S. around 4 months before he was figured out. Even when they were confronted with the idea it wasn't him, the family appeared combative, refusing to cooperate with law enforcement and to take a DNA test to clear the matter up right away. Did they just want it to be their Nicholas so much they ignored the warning signs? Or is there another, more sinister reason? It has been mentioned numerous times the theory that Nicholas Barclay's family could have been responsible for his death. The thinking is that could be why they were so willing to accept him, because then the person responsible for his death would never be punished. The person who is mentioned most often is his older brother, Jason. He was described as a cocaine addict with a violent temper. Bardon did say that Jason was the only one who didn't seem to buy that he was Nicholas, and his only words to him were, "Good luck." When the FBI questioned Jason around the time Bourdain was discovered, he was not very cooperative and basically told them he knew all along it wasn't Nicholas, but wasn't going to tell his family that. You can't help but wonder why Jason was so convinced it wasn't his brother when the rest of the family was. Did Jason know that Nicholas wasn't coming back? Sadly, not long after the FBI interview and shortly before Bourdain was arrested, Jason died of a drug overdose, so any answers he may have had, he took with him to the grave. When Bardon told the FBI that the family killed him in regards to Nicholas, a homicide investigation was opened. It was eventually closed, however, due to lack of evidence. As for my thoughts, I just can't help but wonder if maybe Jason did know something more about Nicholas's disappearance than he was letting on. By the accounts I've read, he never showed much care that his brother went missing, and his call to the police claiming to have seen Nicholas could have been a red herring to possibly cover his own actions in his brother's disappearance. Even when everyone was learning about it not really being Nicholas, Jason didn't seem to care. He didn't actually mimic the actions of a caring brother. In the past, when Nicholas would run away, it was always brief, so I don't see what reason he would have had this time to leave and choose to never come back. Of course, what Bourdain did to this family was utterly despicable, and I fear that he continues to do it to other unsuspecting families of missing persons to this day. I want to mention the source where I got a lot of the information for this article. Of course, I did my usual research, but there's actually a documentary about this case that is very compelling. They have in-depth interviews with Nicholas's family, as well as Frederick Bardon. It's on streaming platforms, and I highly recommend watching it. It's called The Imposter, and was released in 2012. I'm glad that the actual disappearance has gotten some attention via the documentary, but frustrated that the person who created this additional heartache for the family is given a forum to further gain attention. After all, Frederick Bardon is to be reviled, not celebrated. The day this podcast will be released is June 13th, 2024, and will mark the 30th anniversary of Nicholas Barclay's disappearance. Part of the reason I decided to cover this case is to show a different type of missing persons case. It is definitely an interesting story, but it's also so maddening to write about. The thing I want people to take away most after hearing this podcast is the one thing that has been tragically overlooked in this case. Nicholas Barclay is still missing. There is really next to nothing out there about his disappearance, more focused on the fraud angle, or if anything is even being done at all to find Nicholas. He has definitely disappeared into thin air. It is still unknown if he chose to run away that day or perhaps did meet with foul play, maybe even by someone he knew. This family has been through so much, and it's hard to know the kind of evil that lurks in Frederick Bardon to be able to perpetrate such a cruel con. This concludes my podcast on Nicholas Barclay. If you liked it, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. My podcast can be found on Amazon Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. It is one word, Lost and Found Podcast. I release a new episode every 2 weeks. You can always find all of my articles, as well as links to my most recent podcast, on my website at Lost and Found Blogs. You can also reach me at Lost and Found Podcast at Yahoo. And remember that cold cases stay cold because their story stops getting told.